How many of you believe that sometimes wars are justified and sometimes they aren't? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
I'd say necessary. Sometimes depends on how you define war, though.
Okay, we aren't even near the church. This is not the choir. The argument that I make in this book, and this will be a more interesting discussion, and I'll be brief, and then we'll do questions and discussion. That the argument that I make is that war is never justified. That the idea that we have in our society that sometimes wars are good, sometimes wars are necessary or noble or even glorious, will someday be seen as a worse sort of depravity than the idea that sometimes slavery is good or sometimes torture is good. I know that one's coming back now in our own culture, but you know, we have a majority in this country now that says we never should have gone into Iraq. But when we went into Iraq, we had a majority that said, let's do it. We have a majority that says we never should have gone into Afghanistan. But at the time, when we went in, we had a majority that said, yeah, let's go. And so what I hope to help move us toward a little bit is getting to that place where we say, no, we don't believe these stories at the time, before they get the thing started, because they're so hard to end once they get them started. And arguably, we've been doing that for several years now with Iran. There have been arguments for hostilities with Iran for years now that have not gotten very far with the American public, in large part because of their similarity to the lies that took us into Iraq and the great awareness that there were lies that took us into Iraq. I have so many people, intelligent, informed people, say to me that the Iraq War was unique. The Iraq War is the first time, we've never seen this before, a president lied to the American people about war. I mean, very, very smart people who will tell you this. Or well, yeah, there was Vietnam, but in between Vietnam and 2003, you know, we were fine. And I wanted to try to correct that understanding a little bit, to suggest that if you look at wars through U.S. history and every other nation's history, and from both sides of every war, you just can't find much honesty. They're always based on lies. There are lies told to get them started, often mutually contradictory lies, lies about how we have to wipe these evil people off the face of the earth, and lies about how we have to help them and invade them to protect their rights, that appeal to different portions of our population, whether the two excuses for the war agree with each other or not. And we have lies through the course of a war, lies that are used when other lies collapse, lies that are used to generate escalations and to keep wars going, lies about how the wars are for the sake of the soldiers who are fighting them, and lies after the fact to beautify the wars that had nothing to do with what was happening at the time. Right? Lies about how the Civil War was begun to end slavery, lies about how World War II was begun to save the Jews, lies that make wars look better after the fact, and on top of all the underlying lies that keep the whole thing going, the lies about how we can possibly survive this economically, environmentally, in terms of blowback and proliferation of weapons, in terms of having any civil liberties and representative government in place. You know, it is possible to maintain that some war in the past was necessary, and millions of people will do this with World War II, and still understand that we cannot possibly continue the war-making course that we're on now. We can't. Our ecosystem, our economy, our relationships in terms of brewing hostility and blowback cannot survive it. And yet I think it's important to go back and look through all of those wars and understand that they were always based on lies. Right? There's nothing unique about Iraq. We went into Mexico and claimed they invaded us. We claimed that Spain blew up the Maine with no evidence. We claimed the Lusitania had no troops and weapons on it when we know perfectly well that it did, and it had been advertised in the New York papers to warn people. Every single war, you have the lies that get it going and the lies that keep it going. a couple months ago, the president spoke from the Oval Office about 2 of our current wars and embraced the whole string of lies from the weapons of mass destruction on through the surge, and then pivoted from the surge to Afghanistan and began talking about that. And this is one of the more damaging lies at the moment, this idea that you fix a war that's not going very well by escalating it. Right? This was what we all elected the Democrats for in 2006, remember, was to escalate a war in Iraq. And it's, I devote a good section to the lies about the surge in the book, because the surge is a myth. The positive trends that were there in Iraq had nothing to do with the surge, and the places where a minimal number of new troops were put in did not see those results. And the real factors that caused the decline in violence are not there in Afghanistan. It's not a useful recipe for escalating wars. And so many of you who are at a Peace and Justice Center are going to agree with much of this. You may find some stories in here that surprise you and some that don't, but I made this as a tool for counter-recruitment, as a tool for starting conversations and converting people who are supporters of wars. And so it doesn't go through war by war by war through history, which would get very repetitive, but it goes through themes of major types of lies. So chapter 1 is wars are not fought against evil. Chapter 2, wars are not launched in defense. Wars are not waged out of generosity, etc., and pulls examples from a variety of wars. And I look at how they talk about the wars in public and how they talk about the wars in private. And there are things that overlap, right? The things that dominate the private discussions, the desires to dominate the world and fend off rivals and control resources and build bases and station weapons and make money, all show up in the public discussions too. They're not usually secret. They're just mentioned once on page 15 and left at that, and they're not repeated over and over again on the front page, like spreading democracy and weapons of mass destruction and so forth. And then there are things like support the troops that are always there in public and are never there in private, where it's more a conversation about how can we get some American troops killed so we can lock ourselves into this war, which is the opposite of what you hear in public. And it's very illuminating to see what's been coming out in these WikiLeaks cables, because it's a glimpse of largely private discussions. And I know all we're supposed to think is that, Mr. Assange is a traitor who has sex with Swedish women and doesn't call them the next day and so forth. But I think that if you look at what's actually come out in the cable, the fact that we have a ground war in Pakistan that they were continuing to lie to us about, the fact that Pakistan and Yemen are both lying to their publics and the world about our wars there, the fact that we supported and knew about a coup in Honduras, the fact that our government put so much pressure on Spain and Italy and Germany and England to prevent prosecutions and investigations and commissions looking into our war crimes, including torture, the fact that BP had a very similar incident prior to the one in the Gulf, that if our government had told anyone about, we might have been able to force some greater restrictions in place prior to the one in the Gulf. I mean, just endless scandals. Our embassy in Norway, quote, living and breathing for a year and a half, its job of selling Lockheed Martin planes to Norway, the extent to which our diplomatic staff on our tax dollars are devoted to their jobs as assistant salesmen and women for our weapons companies. And the extent to which everything that our diplomats do is dictated by the CIA and the Pentagon. The CIA instructing our UN staff in spying on other nations' UN diplomats, which is crime. I mean, there are a lot of crimes as well as abuses and offenses in here. And you get a picture of the world that's very, very different from the picture of the world that you're presented in the marketing campaigns for the wars, which are not all rational lies. A lot of it is racism and fear-mongering, but it's a lot of lies. And to have people like Bradley Manning locked up without charge in isolation for 7 months, and somebody like your friend Condoleezza Rice roaming the earth free, and able to join Bush and Cheney in openly bragging about crimes. And someone like Condoleezza Rice, who was not inclined to comply with a congressional subpoena, is a problem. We have two sides of lawlessness now. We have punishment without charges, and we have confessions without charges from those at the top. And part of the answer is going to you know, I'm sort of looking at a long-term approach of educating people and giving people a tool to educate others, but part of the answer is going to be holding these people accountable. You know, 5 years ago, a handful of us were working with John Conyers, who was the ranking minority member in the House Judiciary Committee when the Democrats were pretending that they cared about things. And this was, you know, if you look at Bush's new book, back in 2006, Mitch McConnell, the minority Republican leader, who was denouncing as traitors anyone who opposed the wars, went privately to Bush and said, we've got to get our troops out of Iraq before the '06 elections. You know, that's how close we were. They never tell you how close you are until you get there. But 2006 was that last moment when the groups and institutions that take their orders from the Democratic Party were lined up with the peace groups. We were all together pushing for peace, and we had a lot more power. And in '05, when the Democrats were in the minority and they could promise all kinds of things or hint at all kinds of things and not have to do anything, we were working with John Conyers and started this series of, I'm sure it's in the hundreds now, the hearings that he's held for the past 5 years on all the war crimes. And he held one a week or two ago with good witnesses as well as bad, going yet again, all of the war crimes and lies. And Jeremy Scahill from The Nation magazine was there and actually had the nerve to tell the chairman of the committee in the hearing, you know, essentially you've destroyed the power of subpoena. We've had the Democrats for 4 years and no subpoenas enforced. I'm sure you all remember that Condi was not inclined to comply. And didn't. Same with Cheney and dozens of them. And for the past 2 years, none of those subpoenas have been reissued or enforced. At some point, we're going to have to get that kind of action in place. I don't want to take too long before we have questions and discussion, because you know better than I do where you want to go. But I thought I would try reading a brief selection from the book to give you a taste of it, which I've never really done before, even with my previous book, but I thought I would give it a try and see what you think.